Kristen.
And I'm Bethany.
And this is Looking for the Middle,
A Christian girl's guide to modern dating.
We are just two single girls trying to figure out how to date well as Christian women.
Yep.
So thanks for joining us for another episode.
Okay, so I was thinking, after the last episode, we talked about what it looks like to wait well. But I figured we ought to tell people some of the things that we do, or we're doing now, to do that.
Oh, yes, that's a great idea.
Let's throw some things out there that we've done recently or are doing to wait well and use our time wisely in this season.
Okay, cool. Well, I am going on a road trip next spring.
It's going to be super fun.
It's going to be so much fun. So me and Bethany's other sister, Lindsay, if you're keeping track, that's both sisters we've
I've got two
mentioned.
sisters.
Yes. We are taking a road trip up the East Coast. So we're going to Washington, D.C. for a couple days. It's going to be like a 2-week thing. So it's going to be...
I'm trying to talk them into letting me come too.
Yes.
I'm working
We're
on
working on it. We're still debating whether we think that's a good
idea.
idea.
My worth and what I bring to the table on this road trip.
Oh gosh, so we're going to Washington, D.C. We're going to go to Boston and Cape Cod, which I've never been to Cape Cod before, so I'm really looking forward to that.
If you're keeping track.
Keeping that in
I would
mind.
like to go.
Yeah. And then we're going to stop in Portland, Maine at the end. So we're literally going up pretty much the entire
such a cool trip.
East Coast.
And that's one of those things, like, if you had little kids or you were married, it would be tougher to do. One, if you're married, you'd have to pay for 2 people to go do that. And if you had little kids, that's a long time in the car.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a really cool thing that is unique to being able to do now.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds super fun. I mean, I'm going in October to South Africa.
For a
month. Mission trip, and it's going to be like a 17-day trip once you take in like all the traveling and stuff.
That's going to be so much fun.
We're going to go on a safari. We're going down to the Cape. There's some people who are talking about cage diving with sharks down at Cape Town, like off the Cape. No.
Shark Week is even like pushing it for me.
I know, I can't even watch that. I told them, I was like, y'all are welcome to go, and I will be there on the shore cheering you on when you get back. Yeah. But no, I'm not doing that.
That's so fun. And this isn't your first time going either.
I went in 2013.
Has it been 5 years?
It has, I think, or 14. One of those, 4 or 5 years ago. I went for a couple of weeks. We have some missionaries that work closely with our church based there, so we're going to go help them with some events that they have going on. So that's a big thing coming up, but you can do little things too. Like I wanted to learn how to sew. And there's a lady in our church who does these like sewing classes, and I was like, you know what? I want to learn how to do this. And I took her beginning class, and yes, I was the only person in there over 10 years old. But that's fine. It was fun. I know how to sew. I've sewn a couple of things since then, and now I have a skill that I didn't before because I had the time to do that.
Yeah, I literally thought of you the other day because we were all making fun of Bethany for going to sewing camp with all the 10-year-olds a few weeks ago. But then I was sitting in my apartment the other day wearing leggings, and there was a hole like in the inside of my thigh, and my first thought was, Bethany can fix this for me.
You wish you'd gone to sewing camp. Well, that is one of the things I sewed was I had a pair of leggings that the seam had like unraveled, so it was right on the seam, and so I just got my little sewing machine out. Actually, I take that back. I got my mom's sewing machine out because I don't have my own. I had
Christmas present.
I had to borrow it, but yeah, I just sewed it right up, and otherwise I would have had to throw them away because I wouldn't have known what to do. So it's been really fun, and I don't care if I'm the oldest person there by like 3 times their age.
It's a great skill. It's a great skill. Well, and 2, I mean, we've done something else really big with our time. I mean, what we're doing right now is kind of a big deal.
I know.
At least in our eyes it is.
It is. Well, and it's really easy for us to say, ooh, let's start a podcast, and we're going to record, and we don't have any other schedules to take into account. We just meet up whenever we want to, and
there was so much, spontaneity.
We're literally sitting in a room by ourselves at our church recording this.
Yeah.
Because we can.
Yeah. At 9:30 on it's my weekend. It's not your weekend. But yeah, and that's what we talked about last episode, where there are so many opportunities to say yes in this time in your life. And this was a really fun one, and a really spur of the moment one.
It was.
Shockingly enough.
Yeah.
And it's been great.
It's been really fun. And we just wanted to kind of give you guys some insight into the big and little things we're doing to try to practice what we preach, I guess you could say.
Here we go.
To do the things we're telling other people to do. So yeah.
Yeah. And like we said last time, if you guys have ideas or fun things that you're doing, let us know. Go hit us up on social media, send us an email. We
like trying new things.
Yes. Well, I like trying new things with other people. I'm not.
That's true. I don't go by myself a lot.
No, I'm not a independently spontaneous person.
I come up with ideas.
Yeah.
Spontaneously.
Okay.
Independently. But I like to do them with other people. So that's a good point.
That's a good way to do it. And that's why we have each other.
Yes.
So it all works out great. So today we are going to be talking about one of my favorite topics. I think I say that every week, but this one legitimately is one of my favorite things to talk about. And it's the list. Air quotes all around. And by list, I mean future husband lists. And I have had one of these for a very long time.
Oh,
Bethany
I have
has too. A lot of girls have these. I mean, I think my brother asked me one time, because I was talking to a couple of my friends about it. He's like, do all of y'all have one of those?
Yep.
I'm like, pretty much. Like, if you meet a girl who doesn't, at least, whether it's written down or mentally or whatever, girls pretty much across the board have in their mind.
Especially if it's not written down, you have something in your head of what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And it can be 5 things, it could be 55 things, but we all have them.
Oh, yeah. And so we're going to kind of start at the beginning and go through when we kind of what we've learned since we made our very first list and all the drafts and edits and the process of what that's looked like.
My 31-year-old list doesn't look anything like my 17-year-old list.
Oh, gosh, no.
And that is a good thing.
Yes, it's a great thing. And then at the very end of the episode, we are going to give y'all a glimpse into our current lists, just to give you an idea of we actually have matured a little bit since we were 17.
And I mean, let's be real, also, any guys listening, just so you know what
just
we're
mental
looking
notes
for.
Or actual notes. If you're that person, that's fine too. But yeah, so we're going to kind of start from the beginning and then make our way to the present of the evolution of our lists and what we feel like we've learned and how these can be helpful, but then what to watch out for when you have one too.
Because they can be very helpful. I think it's a smart thing to actually spend. If nothing else, it makes you devote time to thinking about what you're looking for. But it can be a bad thing if used the wrong way too. And so I think that's where we're going to start, is some of the ways that we have misused or even viewed our lists in a harmful way, or I don't know, harmful sounds dramatic, but in a negative way.
Yeah, negative
not
way.
helpful. Mm-hmm. And one of those is, it's so easy to use this list as an excuse to be selfish. And I think there's a lot of pride in that mentality when, you've got this list of demands, almost like a ransom note, that it's like this thing that you're just demanding God give you all of these things. It's not meant like that at all. I mean, there's nothing about that lines up with any sort of biblical model of life. It's meant as a reminder to yourself to stay the course and seek God's best. But I would say, don't misuse that phrase. So many people, I think, do that. I'm not gonna date him because he's not good enough because I'm just waiting for God's best. As if you deserve, this perfect guy that you're gonna just dismiss everyone else along the way because you kind of hide behind that phrase. Newsflash. You're not perfect.
Nope.
I don't think anybody really thinks
contrary to popular belief, maybe.
Yeah. But you can't expect to have this perfect guy, kind of like we talked about in the last episode, dropped on your doorstep. The UPS guy isn't going to just drop him off. You've got to be those things too. So waiting on the ever-elusive Prince Charming is an exercise in futility because he's not out there, and the sooner you realize that, the easier it's going to be when you're evaluating guys in your life.
Yeah. And if, part of you just died inside a little bit when you heard Prince Charming wasn't real, it's okay. I've been there, so don't feel bad.
I have to remind Kristen of this on a semi-regular basis.
I am such a hopeless romantic that there's part of me that has this realistic view of life, and then there's this little bitty part of me I'm like, oh, but what if he is?
What if Cinderella's real?
Yeah. But then, Bethany brings me back down to reality, and it's great. But another thing, you can't really have a healthy view on your list if you're using it as a way to search for Prince Charming. And because like Bethany said, no guy is perfect. And one thing I really want to make clear is it is not a guy's job to complete you. I was meeting with a lady at work a few weeks ago, and somehow we got on the topic of dating, and she is an author, and so she has met with engaged couples kind of researching for her book, and she told me, she said, Kristen, if I hear one more person say, oh, they complete me, she's like, I am going to shoot somebody. It is just, because that's not the right mentality to come to a relationship with. It's you should be striving for your 100%, whatever that looks like. He should be striving for his 100%, and then you come alongside each other. It's not, oh, I'm just going to be 50 and then I expect him to fill this other half. And that's so much pressure to put on a guy.
Oh, yeah.
And how would you feel if he put that kind of pressure on you? That gives me so much,
Yeah, it's a lot to live up to. Well,
Yeah.
and it's not even a lot to live up to. You can't live up to that.
No, you can't.
Period. So.
No. And so kind of think about it that way. You wouldn't want to go into a relationship and a guy be like, oh, I'm expecting you to fill this, and this in my life.
So don't put that on him.
No, not at all. And if this is some void you're trying to fill, if that's kind of the mentality you have of, oh, a relationship is going to fill this void, I hate to break it to you, but that's never going to fully fill you up. You will not be satisfied with just that. Like, God is designed to fill that void, and he is the only one that is going to be able to fill it. So
yeah. He created us to need him.
Yeah, and nobody else. And that's such a hard thing to kind of process and wrap your mind around when you think about culture and how we view marriage and how you hear about people talk about their spouses and all this stuff, which is wonderful to really value your spouse, but you can't. You got to keep them in their proper place.
You got to say it all goes back to prioritization of the hierarchy of authority and importance of things in your life.
Yeah.
And God should always be at the top.
Yeah, so ladies, just keep a realistic expectation a little bit, as heartbreaking as it is that Prince Charming doesn't technically exist.
I love how you throw that technically.
Technically.
You're still holding on to
I
hope.
still am. I'm not saying that the guy, that if you marry a guy, he's not going to be absolutely wonderful, but don't expect him to be perfect.
No.
Because no guy is going to meet every single item on your list.
No, it's not.
Just
and
not.
You've heard people say, there's no perfect guy out there, but there is a guy who's perfect for you. And that's true. They're not going to be perfect, but their flaws and their imperfections are going to be perfect for you and for your relationship and the way that God uses that to sanctify both of you.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now,
So,
Bethany.
I'll talk for a minute so that Kristen can cope with the whole Prince
with the
Charming
loss
isn't
of
real.
Prince Charming, go mourn for a minute.
And I think this next one is something that, I don't know how much you've done this. This is something that I've done in the past. I kind of have used my list as a defense mechanism, for lack of a better term. It's kind of like my fallback for, it's an easy thing to blame, I guess you could say, when you just don't want to go out with a guy anymore, or kind of like we said earlier, technology shouldn't be a security blanket to avoid hard things. This shouldn't either. If you don't want to go out with a guy or you're not interested, you need to just tell him. Don't start looking at this list and try to justify in your mind all these little nitpicky things that he's not as an excuse to not have to deal with them. We kind of over-spiritualize it, I think, that, I want all of these things, and I'm, like I said before, I'm waiting for God's best. But you have to keep that in perspective of, this is just a list on paper. You need to evaluate the person in front of you, and don't hide behind this list because there's some nitpicky thing that you don't like or isn't going to work, and you're going to have, I have high standards. I think we say that a lot too. Mm-hmm. I'm not picky. I just have high standards. Please. And like I said, I this is me. I have done this.
Yeah.
I have to watch against this, that I don't start looking for little nitpicky things just because you're afraid of something.
Yeah.
So that's one that I've struggled with, I think.
Yeah, and two, there's a difference between if you're having high standards in the sense of these are things that, qualities of that all humans should be striving for according to Scripture. That's one thing if that's what your standards are based on. If you have high standards just in your preferences, which we'll talk about in a minute, that's a whole different story.
Well, and I think if you elevate those preferences to scriptural standard level, basically, that's where you're going to go wrong. Mm-hmm. Because no one's going to meet that. And they shouldn't. That's not something that's required of them.
No,
that's
not
just
at all.
your preference.
Yeah. So these are just a few of the ways that you could possibly misuse your list. And we're saying that because we have done all of these things on multiple occasions. This is not just a one and done mistake kind of a thing. This is something we continually have to remind ourselves and keep ourselves in check of how we're managing our list.
Yeah, and I think overall, the overarching theme through all of these things in the particulars is it's your heart attitude. Are you looking for a guy who's searching after Christ and letting everything else fall into place behind that? That's the chief goal. Or are you looking for a guy first and foremost who has all of these more superficial qualities that you want? What is more important to you? And I think that's a heart thing. What is truly more important to you? And if you get that right with yourself, the other stuff will fall into place.
Absolutely. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what your list should be for and how your list should look, and what are maybe some things that you should think through as you're either making your list, if this is the first time you're making one, or if you're editing it for the 17th time.
The 12th draft.
Yeah, like we have so often done. I think the first thing that your list should be is a convicting reminder that you should be striving to be what the type of man you're looking for will be looking for himself.
Yeah, you've got to be these things too.
Yeah, so my pastor phrased it in a way, and I love this so much. He asks, are you who the person you're looking for is looking for?
Yeah.
Which totally turns it around on you, because I think when we get in this list mode, we're like, oh, I want this, and I want this, and this will be good for me, and he'll compliment me this way. No. And it's, okay, if this is what I want, if I find a guy like this, is he going to want me? Like, would I kind of fit the same as far as scriptural standards and qualities? And it really is, taking a look back at your list and looking in the mirror a little bit and thinking, okay, do I measure up to all these things? Or am I, even if I'm not perfect at any of these, am I striving for these things? Am I trying to work on myself to better myself in these areas? And if not, then that you may need to rethink a few things.
Well, that's one thing I heard years ago, and it wasn't about singleness, but he was just talking about life, and he said it's not the perfection of your life, it's the direction of your life.
Ooh,
so
I like
any
that.
quality or pattern of character that you're trying to cultivate, it's not about perfection, because we're not going to get there, but it's about the direction of your life. Are you steadily moving towards being more like Christ in whatever that area is? And that's what I would want in a guy, but that's also what you should want of yourself. In all of these qualities, are you going in that direction steadily and consistently?
Absolutely. And so I think the way we kind of wanted to approach this was, because you hear people say all the time, the Bible doesn't talk about dating. Dating didn't exist.
And it doesn't.
When the Bible was written. Lucky them. So
I don't know. They got bought for like a few sheeps and a cow or
That's
two.
true. I don't know really if that's any better. You're like, I was sold for 3 cows. Like, is that how you measured your self-worth? Is how many farm animals you were?
Followers now, and
seriously,
cows and chickens then. It's kind of the same thing.
Oh my gosh. Oh man. But yeah, so the Bible doesn't talk about dating, but one thing I am sure of is the Bible talks about how we should strive to live our lives as followers of Christ. And so you can take those characteristics that are outlined in Scripture and really kind of develop your list starting from that. And so
you should.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you should do. And that's something we had to learn as we matured and got older, because I can tell you one thing that I can tell you one thing that my list, the very first time I made it, had a few faith-related things, but the majority of it was not based off of how we're called to live. Yeah. According to...
a typical high school
absolutely.
list, really.
Which we'll laugh about that in a minute.
Well, you can hear all those things.
But Bethany and I each picked a passage of Scripture. Both of these you have probably heard on multiple occasions, but we wanted to kind of break these down and talk a little bit about how these can kind of bleed into your lists.
Yeah, I think for both of us, these separate ones were kind of key in helping us kind of reform and reshape our lists. So I'll jump in first. Mine was Ephesians 5, which everybody knows what that says. Yeah. Verses 25 to 31. But there's a whole lot more there for what a husband should be, what you should be looking for, than just that husbands love your wives phrase. There's a lot more to it. So in that passage, it talks about several different kinds of love. Starting out in verse 25, it says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That's a sacrificial love. He gave himself up for her. And so there's several different categories, and I would encourage you as I go through these, think about your list, go through your list, and if the qualities on that list don't fall under one of these 4 types of love that a husband is called to, then it's going to be under the preference area, and it'll kind of give you a gut check of what things have you elevated past preference status. So the first one is that sacrificial love in verse 25. Then it goes on in verses 26 and 27. It says that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor without spot or wrinkle. That's a purifying love. Husbands are called to love their wives in a way that sanctifies them, pushes them closer to Christ. And so we should be looking for qualities that would enable him to do that. Verse 28 then goes on and says, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. That's a caring love. He cares about his wife just as much as he would himself. And then if you jump down to verse 31, it says, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. That is an unbreakable love. So we've got a sacrificial love, purifying love, caring love, and unbreakable love. Those are scriptural. Those are things right there, straight out of the Bible. That's what a husband is called to. He's not called to be 6'4", dark hair, blue eyes, which you'll see in a minute, that was on my list. He had to be over 6 feet tall, and I like guys with darker hair. So, that doesn't fall under anything. And you learn to prioritize those things under these 4 categories. Because this is true love. It may not be what Hollywood sells, but this is true love. And don't sell yourself short and settle for the world's romantic comedy ideal that will leave you empty and dissatisfied once you get down to it, because it's so self-focused. Nothing about any of these types of love are about yourself. So you're looking for that selflessness in a husband, but you need to have that mentality when you're looking for him, too.
Well, and I think, too, this is something that these are all things that a lasting relationship is built on. And that's something that when you base a relationship off things that change or are fleeting, these are things that are going to stick out through tough times, good times, ups, downs, whatever, because you have this kind of foundation that's really strong.
Mm-hmm. And remember, if it's not something commanded, like we read about, this passage starts out, husbands, love your wives. It's not a question, it's not a recommendation. And then everything else that follows from that just defines what that looks like. But it is a command. And so if it's not something commanded in Scripture, or something that falls under one of those command categories, then it's just your preference. And yeah, your preferences may be great in your own eyes, but don't forget, God always knows better. He knows what you need to make you and your future husband more like him. And that may not look like your preferences.
I love that. That's so good. I've never heard that passage broken down that way, so I like that a lot. So, the passage that I chose, well, I didn't really choose it. I just kind of had an epiphany one day, if there was a list in the Bible, this is about as close to a list as you can get. It's in 1 Corinthians 13, also known as the love chapter. So I'm going to talk about verses 4 through 8. A couple of things before I start going through this passage. A lot of these, or all of these characteristics, are going to come more naturally from someone who follows Jesus.
Someone who's not, seeking Christ won't be able to do these things.
No. That's why we prioritize dating, marrying somebody who loves the Lord and is living out their faith at the very top of the list, because all of these other things are going to come from that.
The ultimate non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
So anything we talk about, and I kind of want to just keep saying this, anything we talk about throughout this podcast, we may not mention it every single time, but it is a foregone conclusion that the guys we're talking about love Jesus, they're seeking him, they're deepening their faith day by day, and then everything else flows from that.
Yeah. So I'm going to go through these verses. Some of these are self-explanatory. I'm not going to define some of these for you, but I do want you to start thinking about these words as you're looking over your list. So the first thing is that in verse 4 it says love is patient. I don't think it's a coincidence that patience was listed first.
No.
And I think that there are so many different ways that patience can be applied in a relationship, whether that's patience during conflict, whether that's patience when you're doing something that gets on his nerves, or when he's doing something that gets on your nerves, like he loads the dishwasher weird or something. That's something my parents argue about all the time. Or patience in waiting for you and you waiting for him and all that entails. So even before you actually get together, like there are so many different manifestations of this word, but I think it's very important that it was listed first. So patient. Love is kind. You just can't really be a guy that's kind. Like you don't want some guy that's a jerk. Well, you don't want the bad boy.
No.
I know you think you do, but you really don't.
Trust me.
At the end of the day. Love does not envy, aka he's not jealous. And girls, I get that it's kind of cute when like a guy gets a little bit jealous and you want him to, be somewhat protective of you, but if he's over jealous or possessive,
or even just in all of life, if he's wanting something else.
Yeah, and
whether
he's never satisfied.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's always wanting the next thing and he's never content.
Or what somebody else has, or,
That's a big one. He does not boast. He's not arrogant. We've talked about this already, the difference between confidence and arrogance. You can go back and listen to our episode on boys versus men and the first 2 men that you should look to date if you want a little bit more breakdown on that. Love is not proud is the next one, which kind of bleeds in with.
It doesn't. I love how, though, it's 2 separate things. Love is not proud, which is your heart and mind mentality. And then does not boast. It doesn't say those things.
It's verbal. It doesn't act on that pride. That's really good.
I think it points out how prevalent pride is in everyone's life. That it's like, okay, we're going to break this one down twice because you really need to know about this because we're so prideful.
Well, and just because you don't vocalize your pride doesn't mean you're not prideful either. So I think that's really good that you pointed out that distinction there. Love does not dishonor others is the next one. That means he's not rude, he's not mean, he's not demeaning towards other people or belittling of other people. He values others, he honors them, he's caring, those kinds of things. Love is not self-seeking. Very self-explanatory. He's not selfish.
Yeah.
And all the things that Bethany said earlier about being selfish, you can just write all those down.
Put it under here.
Yes. Love is not easily angered. He doesn't have a temper. And he's not violent, and he doesn't not have self-control. That's like a triple negative. But
well, and I think that one, not easily angered, and kind of like earlier we're talking about arrogant and boasting, he doesn't have a temper and lash out, but also he has a patient, long-suffering heart. That he, little things aren't going to make him angry, whether he shows that outwardly or not. Because like it says, if you've been angry with your brother, you've murdered him in your heart. So it's not just that outburst, it's the heart attitude as well.
Yeah, and that he doesn't harbor bitterness or anything like that. Love doesn't keep record of wrongs, so he's not manipulative. He's not going to be...
He's not going to throw things back in your face.
No, not at all. He's not going to delight in evil. In other words, he dislikes bad things, which if you want to get really simple there. So he's not going to gravitate towards
worldly things.
But on the flip side, he rejoices with truth, and he likes the good things. So those 2 kind of go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah, he seeks the things of Christ.
Yes. And then these last few are my favorites because they're all like rapid fire, but they're so good. Love protects, love trusts, and love hopes are all said together. And I know personally those are really big on my list. I want a guy who protects me and takes care of me. I want a guy who trusts me and who I can trust as well. And I want a guy who's hopeful and he isn't, pessimistic all the time, or he isn't doubtful. He is hopeful in what Christ is going to do in his life and in our relationship, and
Because
just
his
in
hope
general.
is in Christ.
Yeah, and he's got that
Yeah.
eternally based hope. And then finally, love always perseveres. And I think this is so important because in my mind, this means it doesn't give up easy. Mm-hmm. And it's going to fight when things get tough. It reminds me of...
you don't run.
Yeah, that episode of Friends where Monica and Chandler get in a fight and Chandler just automatically assumes they're going to break up.
She's like, what?
And she's like, we're not breaking up just because we had a fight.
And that's like earth-shattering to him.
And she's like, is that why you've never been in a really long relationship? But it's true because when you stick things out, when things get hard, that's what's going to make your relationship stand the test of time. And if you really, truly love that person, like this is describing, then you're going to have that motivation to stick it out, regardless of how tough it gets. One last thing I want to note, too, is, and this is a preaching to the choir moment, none of these are based on physical appearance.
Yeah.
So just let that marinate. I don't really
need to... That's all you have to say.
That's not the focus here.
Well, and one thing I would want to point out, too, that when we talked about in Ephesians 5 earlier, it specifically starts out, husbands, love your wives. And everything that goes from there is a command to husbands, specifically. Now, that doesn't mean there's not things that we can take from that. But this chapter in 1 Corinthians is gender neutral. It's not something that is specifically to men or specifically to women. We've been talking about it from the standpoint of what you should be looking for in a husband, because that's what we're talking about today. But all of these things are just as much commanded and required of us as girls. So this goes back to what you were saying earlier. Are you these things too? Are you what the kind of guy you're looking for is going to be looking for in a wife? So take all of what we just said, flip it around on yourself, and then you'll be good to go. That's
headed in the right direction.
Yes, exactly. So we've talked about the way we've kind of messed up with our lists and used them in not helpful ways. We've talked about what it should be, what our lists are now. So we're going to just rip off the Band-Aid and maybe embarrass ourselves a little bit. And we're going to tell you what some of those things on our old lists were.
And a little grace here. I was 17 when I made my first one.
I was in high school. I don't remember how
16
old,
or 17. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, and then we'll go through some of our current ones as well. Okay, so mine, my old one. And I will say most, if not all of these things have been relegated to the it doesn't really matter section now. So, okay, one of the big top ones for me, which I look back and I'm like, why did this matter, was he needed to be politically aware and in touch with, like, politics. I love politics. I like, current events and that sort of thing. And so that was a big thing to me in high school, that he just... And I look back now and I cringe, but also...
That is something I don't think I've ever heard any of my friends put on their list.
I'm a funny one. He had to be athletic.
Obviously.
And played sports, had played sports, loved to travel. And in my head at the time, that meant, hop on a plane and travel to some exotic foreign location.
Yeah, we had no idea how much that costed whenever we were 17.
Yeah, for real. In high school, you don't have a good grip on reality with that. And I like to travel.
Oh, yeah.
But I like a road trip to, the next state over just as much as I do flying to the,
tip of Africa
or whatever. Yeah, exactly. So, I had on my old list that he must be taller than me. Bold, underlined, must, absolute non-negotiable. And while I know, according to everything we've just talked about, that doesn't matter and should be way far down on my list, that one is really hard to let go of. And then I had on there dark hair, blue eyes.
Like you.
Yeah, like me. I don't know.
Have little blue-eyed, dark-haired babies.
Pretty much. Doesn't matter at all. But those were the things. I mean, those were important to me.
Oh, yeah.
When they were, on my list before. So that was, that was that. Okay, so do you want to go through your old one and then we'll circle back to our
circle back to the current one. So just to give you like a little bit of a backstory, my first list, I was on my way to my first college tour in high school with my parents. And my mom was talking to me and she really encouraged me to make one. And she had one, and hers was very specific going back, which is kind of funny. But she had this mentality of, Kristen, you're going to college, so yes, you want to have this list as a way to, have good standards when you're going to date somebody. But also, you want to make this list to keep you accountable and not let you settle. I think we automatically assume that lists can be too high, which they can, but it's also you have that list in your mind and you meet a guy and he's not doing some of the things we've talked about, then that's going to keep you accountable and think, okay, yeah, he may be good by the world's standards, but is he good by the standards that I'm called to live by myself, or that, anybody as a Christian is. So that's kind of the mentality I had making mine, or should have had when I made mine, let's say, because I started making this list and I laugh at it so much now. But really the top 3 things on my list were loves Jesus, hot, and at least 6 feet tall. Okay? That was how I started this. And I starred all the really important ones.
Get all the important things out. Yeah.
I starred all the really important ones. Those were all 3
goodness.
starred, which is just so funny to me now. But the height thing was on mine too. But then, of course, I did have some good things. Like, I had kind and goal-oriented.
But way on down the list where they should be.
Right. Yeah. I had, likes to cook.
Not just can, but he likes to.
No, former football or baseball player was on there. Very specific.
No. What if he played golf?
I don't know. It wasn't starred, so it wasn't, like, necessary, but it was just really kind of the type I was looking for. I said that he didn't need to have any piercings or tattoos, which I have now dated guys with both of those.
I was going to say, the piercings one, I get. Yeah. I probably tend towards
still
that.
Not a huge fan.
I don't mind tattoos, though.
Oh, I like tattoos now.
I'm a fan.
So that's changed.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it was just very funny to
I know.
think about and be like, why did I think this was so...
What was I thinking?
All right, so, Bethany, why don't you go through your new list now and show us all how you've matured and grown up over the years.
My very mature self. Okay, so my list is literally on a piece of paper, and it's got those categories from earlier that we talked about from Ephesians 5 as my headings: sacrificial love, purifying love, caring love, and then unbreakable love. And so I went through my old list, and I took everything, and if it went under one of those categories, I put it there. And if it didn't, then I either deleted it completely, or I do still have a preferences section, but it's where it should be.
Yeah.
So, under that sacrificial love, I'm just going to read a few of each of these. I've got godly, selfless, giving or charitably minded, compassionate, and has an eternal mindset. Like, he sees things now in light of eternity. And then there's several more, but then under purifying love, I've got he's a strong leader, he's patient, he's honest, and then challenges me to embrace God's best. Doesn't settle himself in life, but also would challenge me to be seeking Christ more and more every day. The caring love was next, and I've got under there gentle, a good communicator, hospitable. He likes, is willing to have people over and have has a hospitality mindset. Affectionate, protective, and dependable. Then, under unbreakable love, I've got intelligent, loves kids, devoted, and accountable. There's a couple others under each of them. Now, under my things that don't really matter, but I kind of would still like, I've got, he's funny, he does like to travel, likes sports, is social, athletic, but those aren't things that you should end a relationship based on, or not start one because of, when the overwhelming evidence is that all of those other things are there.
Definitely.
So, that's mine now, and I think it's a better guideline, a better ruler for what to look for than it was.
Yeah.
When the number one thing was that he was politically aware.
I just love that was your top one.
I know. 17-year-old Bethany thought that was really important.
Oh yeah. The things we think are important in high school. So for my current list, I have it split into 2 sections. So I have my non-negotiables and my preferences. Yeah. And this was something my dad really challenged me to do when he read my very first list.
That's He's so like, kind of him to say it that way.
Just some advice here. Maybe split this up. So that's what I did. And a lot of these were not on my list until maybe the past 3 or 4 years. This is a pretty newer draft, I guess you could say. So my very first thing that I say is I want someone who has an obvious relationship with Jesus, and I can tell he loves him without a shadow of a doubt. Just by the way he lives, by the way he treats people, by the way he talks about his faith. I want to be able to pick up on that without having to ask him if he is a Christian. I want a guy who has a heart for others and who has a kind and gentle spirit about him. I want a guy who pursues me and treats me with love and respect.
And these non-negotiable ones are the things that you shouldn't settle for. That's why these are the ones that are really lined up with Scripture that you shouldn't settle for. So I think that's okay.
Yeah, and I have, on the actual written list, I have Scripture to back up each and every one of these. So that it's not just, oh, I just picked this out of thin air. It's not just
your opinion.
No. I want a guy who thinks my character, my faith, and my personality are attractive qualities about me, that it's not just based on how I look. I want a guy who strives to live a life that pleases God and who has a desire to be obedient to the call on his life that he has and pursue the purpose that God has given him. I want someone who strives for purity, even when it is difficult. And that's something I really pray for my husband a lot. That's kind of on my mind. Ladies, I would encourage you to do the same thing. There is, I think, a wonderful thing if we can pray, just for the guys in general, in our brothers in Christ as they're fighting for their purity in this age right now, where it's so difficult. That is something that we can really be helping them with and praying for them about. And then finally, I want somebody who's taller than me.
And I think it's fine to keep that on the non-negotiable
list. Yes, and that is just something, that is the one physical characteristic I am holding strong to. So ladies, if you've got one that you just can't let go of, it's okay. And then, of course, on the preference side, I have, I like a guy that's got an athletic build, who likes sports, has a good sense of humor, who likes to laugh, who's outgoing and driven, and a guy who dresses well is a big plus for me.
That's not a bad thing.
No, I've always thought that was it said a lot about a guy if he dressed well and took care of himself.
It does.
So those are just kind of the two columns, I guess you could say, that I have.
I like it.
Going now.
Okay. So we have bared our souls.
Literally,
a little bit there. Let you see kind of what we're looking for. And we can put the full lists in the show notes. But I think that's it for today, guys. We hope this has been helpful for you as you're trying to create your own list, whether it's for the first time or maybe you need to revisit yours and give it a little edit or a new draft. We're going to be posting our list, like I said, on our social media, the current ones and our old ones. So go follow us on Instagram. It's LFTM_podcast, and on Facebook, looking for the Middle Podcast, so you don't miss those. And I think that's it for this week.
Yeah, and be sure to join us for a very special episode next week. We're actually going to be revealing the results from a survey that went out to a bunch of our guy friends and guy friends of our friends.
Yep.
And we're going to attempt, but probably fail, to understand the male mind when it comes to dating. So we're hoping for a lot of epiphanies.
Hopefully.
We'll see. So until then, I'm Kristen.
And I'm Bethany.
And this is Looking for the Middle.